welcome to this conversation that I'll be having with Carroll Wainright, also known as the Falcon Reads. And I'm actually just trying to think, Carroll, when I first came across your videos. I think it was the Thomas Ligotti video, I think was the first one I came
Oh yeah.
across for, oh, bloody hell, what's it called? Conspiracy Against the Human Race. And then I saw that one and I was like, oh, it's actually because like ages ago I never got around to it. I had the idea of maybe I should do like a book review or something, and then I came across your videos and I was like, oh good, there's someone who's doing it. So but yeah, anyway, before we get deep into things, do you want to just give a bit of an introduction to yourself and how you first even came across the idea of antinatalism?
Okay, sure. Well, I think when you're a kid, you kind of I think maybe have more of a tendency whenever you get like frustrated by something or encounter some kind of adversity, you're kind of
Mm,
have a more tendency to just be like, maybe it would just be easier if I didn't exist. Maybe life would just be easier if you didn't have to live it. And then by the time you get to be like an adult, that kind of gets hammered out of you, and you're like, oh,
yeah.
I'm here for the long haul, so I got to stick around. But it wasn't exactly like some grand watershed moment
Mm,
so much as it was just kind of an incremental process from being, a youth, and then being frustrated by things like in school, like hard with like algebra and
mm,
calculus and everything that I just really struggle with and grade wise, and so you're like, well, you realize things about yourself that maybe you're not constructed quite as you would like to be constructed if you had been given that choice. And then as you go
mm,
on and you grow more and more disillusioned about the world and the very kind of fabric of the world, you kind of realize that it's not quite as savory, I suppose, as you might once have believed it to be. And I'm not just talking about like a human kind of level. I'm talking about like actual base, like
yeah.
nature and things. Very brutal, very violent. You realize that life is basically exists on a mound of corpses because it's geared around killing and violence, and it's very quite cruel actually. And then
Mm,
eventually you go on and you see the world around you just unravel. I mean, when you turn on the news by now, it's just like what hell are we going to witness
yeah.
today?
Yeah.
And by the time you get to that point, I finally was just kind of like, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't want to be born. Um, I didn't ask to be, and I really don't think anyone would, honestly, if
Mm,
they really give it enough thought. Um, I don't know how you could justify that. And I was born into, a industrialized, you know, first world country that has the amenities I need. So I live a
mm,
fairly good life. But there are people in other places that are just their life is just one long nightmare basically. And so I just don't really think you can justify it anymore. And my sincerest wish at this point was that I hadn't been born, and that I had just as my mother used to say, whenever I would suggest doing something stupid, she would say, let's not and say we did. And that's kind of my attitude towards life now.
yeah.
Let's not and say we did. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of how I came to it. I knew, of course, I kind of encountered the actual like philosophy of antinatalism, I guess, through you just researching stuff about like Schopenhauer
Mm,
online and everything, because he was, I guess, the one that kind of kick-started the movement, I guess, and then found more stuff like on Reddit and stuff, and I was like, oh, there, other people have had these same thoughts. So it's kind of something that a lot of people feel, but not maybe a lot of people really want to uh, express or codify, I suppose. But so yeah, that's kind of how I came to it, I
mm.
suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting when you were saying that you were saying, you don't think anyone, if they were fully aware of everything that was going on, would truly want to be born. And it made me think of this quote I heard the other day. I think it was attributed to Schopenhauer, but I think that I was corrected by a friend who said that actually Schopenhauer didn't say this. So I don't know where this quote comes from, or if it's just one of these sort of quotes that come out the ether and anyone knows where it came from. But it was a pessimist is an optimist who's in the full possession of the facts, which
Yes.
I found so funny. It's essentially, you can only be an optimist if you're just completely ignorant about so
Yeah.
many of the things going on in the world, which I found like really funny. And it seemed to vibe with what you were saying just then about, if people were fully aware of the things that happen to humans, let alone other animals,
Mhm.
and the things we do to each other, and the natural things that happen to us, it it beggars belief that anyone would willingly choose to go into that, right?
Absolutely,
um
yes.
yeah. So when did you first so this question just came up when you were talking then, because you said that it was some people like myself have like a watershed moment, as you called it, but then other people, this is a feeling that they've had for a long time, and it sort of develops over time as they come into contact with more things or have more conversations with people. What was the point at which you sort of decided, like, yeah, this is me, I'm going to openly sort of, because it's not like your channel is just about antinatalism or anything, you review many different types of books, but
Mm.
um you mention antinatalism in your videos, obviously, and you openly review antinatalist books and talk about how you agree with many of the things in there. When did you decide to be more open about being an antinatalist?
Well, hard on the sleeves, I guess. I mean, it
Yeah, yeah.
makes for interesting content, because it's a very it's a position that the vast majority of people probably won't get,
Mm,
because it can poke the bear, so to speak. So as they say, any attention is good attention. So some of these books I'll just review, because it's kind of confrontational
yeah.
some ways, because it's just such a slap in the face to what the majority of people believe about
Mm,
life. But I think it's much more logically sound. In fact, I had a question on one of the videos of one of the books I did. They say, "Well,
mm.
what do you think about the arguments for natalism? Like pro life." Well, I don't want to say pro life because that's like a different kind of thing. But
Abortion stuff, yeah.
yeah, yeah. But the pro natalist position, and I said, I think that natalism is argued uh, much more with pathos, whereas antinatalism is argued much more with logos. Um, so
Can you
I think
explain can you explain pathos and logos?
yeah, yeah. Pathos is, the appeal to emotion. Um, Whoever can, make the most moving, teariest speech, can
Mm,
sway people. And Logos is appeal to logic and reason.
mm,
And that's why it's kind of, that's why antinatalism is, I guess, not as popular as natalism. Well, one, because people are hardwired biologically to be natalists and not to turn against nature's imperative, so to speak, but also because people are much more swayed by um, emotion than they are by logic, even though it really should be the other way around.
mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and obviously, I've already referenced that your YouTube channel, you do book reviews. Do you exclusive? I haven't watched every video on your YouTube channel. Do you do exclusively book reviews, or do you do other types of content?
I really, it's just, I'm kind of, the literature buff. That's just kind of my passion in
Mm,
life. If I got to live life, I got to have something to sweeten the deal. So,
yeah.
literature I've always really been passionate about, but really just anything narrative, film,
Mm,
um, I suppose like games too as well, maybe, but films occasionally. But yeah, mostly books because that's what think I have the most
mm.
authority to speak about.
And actually, when you in the first video you did on uh, where you mentioned antinatalism, or did a book review of an antinatalist book, you've already spoken about how you got that one question. What was the general reaction like? Because I'm assuming a lot of the people who watched your videos were probably just interested were like you know, literature buffs. They just liked hearing book reviews. They didn't necessarily expect to have a book review on something that's maybe so like controversial, but also the person giving the book review saying that they agree with it. So did you get any sort of reaction from people, or what was that like?
Well, a lot of them I think were already kind of on board. You get some of them. Some like I had some comments that were like, "Yeah, life is hell. The human body is a prison." I was like, "Yeah,
Mm.
you're already on board." But then some people were all like, "I see the positions, but
Yeah.
they they understand where we're coming from, I guess." But
Mm.
they were like, "I'll just keep on, living my life," and that's fine. But so even the
Mm.
ones that didn't really agree with it were pretty understanding. But a lot
Yeah.
of the comments were from people that were already converts, I guess. So um, pull some more people in the boat, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. And from your I don't know, so I've got to admit, like um I've done a decent amount of reading around antinatalism, but a lot of it has actually been shorter form stuff. So I have read um I've read like the classic Better Never to Have Been. And I've done a lot of other sort of reading, but in terms of antinatalist books, I haven't read an insane number because for me, my my go-to medium for learning isn't reading, to be honest. I'm much more visual a person, and I learn a lot more from interaction, discussion with people. Um, so yeah, books are really not or books or any form of reading are really not my go-to. So you will have much more experience with antinatalist literature than me. What would you say are your top like recommendations for antinatalist books? Or you don't even have to say recommendations, just your top three favorites. Like what are like the three that you would go to as antinatalist books?
Oh, well, I'm glad you asked. I can give some recs, I guess, some recommendations. So, first of all, I actually haven't read Better Never to Have Been. I really wanted
Oh,
to. I was going to
blasphemy.
buy that. Yeah, I was going to buy that and The Human Predicament both. But those books,
Mm,
I don't know. You're in the UK, right?
yeah.
Yeah, well, here in the U.S., on Amazon at least, those books were kind of expensive. It was like 30 or 40 something dollars,
Oh,
and
really?
they were only available in like hardback. So I was like, I guess I would do broader
Yeah.
research online to kind of get the same sentiments because it was kind of forking over
Mm,
a good bit there to get those.
yeah.
But yeah, I have read some. I do have three books here that I can recommend, which I'll go in ascending order of
Mm,
power, I guess, potency, perhaps. So the first one would be one that I've reviewed most recently, which would be this
mm,
book, which is Confessions of an Antinatalist by Jim Crawford. This is really like street level, he doesn't have like an academic background.
mm,
He's just kind of just rapping about how much he hates life now and why it's so testable. But he makes some good points. It's fun. It's very engaging, although it maybe isn't the deepest. Um, but it's a good primer, I would say. And then the second one would be one that you saw, the Conspiracy Against
yeah.
the Human
Yeah.
Race
Yeah.
by Thomas Ligotti. This one's deeper, probably not as deep, I guess, as Better Never to Have Been because that book's like it's like 600 or something pages long, isn't it?
No,
It's
it's not that long, but it's very dense.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Mm,
I would assume it's probably much more comprehensive than this, but this one's
mm,
uh, pretty like good middle water. Very literarily written. Thomas Ligotti obviously is a fiction writer, and he has really good
mm,
prose. He can really craft a good sentence, but he gets his points across very well. And he does it in very entertaining fashion because, like I'm sure you know, this is not just about antinatalism. It's also kind of literary criticism and using examples from certain fictitious pieces to illustrate points that he wants to make.
mm.
Really good stuff. But then you want to go all the way to just the top. We can talk about the unbearable heaviness of being, which is written
Ah.
by Carroll Wainright. I know the author well, so I can vouch for this one.
Yeah.
This is the book that I wrote over like a year and a half to be
Mm,
the true gospel of antinatalism. Like what the Pilgrim's Progress did for Christianity in the
mm,
1600s, this book does for antinatalism now.
mm.
Be warned though, it's pretty rough. It's pretty it goes some dark places, but
Mm,
I think it illustrates the points, the tenets very well. And this is a novel technically, so this is maybe the first true work of antinatalist fiction, perhaps that
mm,
intended to be that. But it goes deep, I think, and it gets the points across, and it can
mm,
open some eyes. So yeah, this would be my number one pick. Would be the unbearable heaviness of being. It's a pun,
mm,
obviously, on the unbearable lightness of being. But
yeah.
yeah, so those would be my main recommendations, I suppose.
So very quickly, so since you've mentioned your book, we'll talk about that. But very quickly before we do, I wanted to mention that I don't know about the human predicament, but I do know that Better Never to Have Been is on audiobook. So I
Oh,
don't know. I don't know if recommending you an audiobook is controversial. I don't know in literary fields if they're frowned upon audiobooks rather than the physical.
well, I've never personally used them, but if it's cheaper than like the $45 version that the hardback
Yeah.
is, I might have to look into that definitely.
Yeah, I don't know what price it is, but I would imagine it's much cheaper, given there's no shipping and like the
Yeah.
physical printing and stuff. Um, so it's not read by Benatar; it's read by another guy who I forget who he is, but I know several people who have listened to Better Never to Have Been, and they've said it's very nice to listen to. The only thing they do say is that in Better Never to Have Been, he does use some diagrams
Mhm.
which are handy obviously to have, hence why he put them in the book. And if you listen to the audiobook, it can be difficult if you don't have the diagrams in front of you. Apparently when you download the audiobook, there is like a supplementary bit of material that has the diagrams on, but you'd obviously have to remember to get that up and have that in front of you while you're listening. But yeah, that is an option anyway. Um, but yeah, anyway, so going on to the book you wrote. So um, I wanted to first ask when you wrote this, and also obviously I know you want people to go and get the book and read it, so you don't want to give all the details now. So only share what you feel happy with. Um, but when you first set out to write this book, did was the starting point I want to write an anti-natalist book, or was the starting
Yeah.
point oh okay, so the starting point wasn't I've got a decent story that I want to tell, and then you worked anti-natalism into it. From the outset you wanted to write an anti-natalist book.
Yeah. The foundation of this was I want to put my sentiments, my feelings,
Mm,
my kind of rage. It's intended to be kind of an angry book, but
yeah.
my sheer bitterness about what I have to endure that I didn't choose to be here for into a fictitious framework, which is both entertaining and engaging, but also um, um, goes really to the heart of the matter. I think so. Yeah,
Mm,
it was geared from the get go to be an anti-natalist text.
mm. And when you were writing it, what audience did you have in mind? Were you thinking this is going to be something that I'm aiming towards anti-natalists who can read it for, you know, like an enrichment of their own views, or was it something that you hoped would be something that people could read and it would be something that would convince them of this way of thinking, or did you not have any audience in mind at all?
I try to just make it be as broad of a net as I
Mm,
possibly could, because it I mean, it's definitely something I think because some of the people that have read it, that have commented about it, they're like, oh, I see where you're coming from. I feel what you're putting down.
mm,
So I know that it at least responds well to some of the people who are already convinced, but I hope that it will have the ability perhaps to make some people think about things because a lot like it's if we want to get just down to basically what it is, it's kind of just a series of Socratic dialogues, we can say, of just kind of point counterpoint about
mm,
life, why it sucks, back and forth with the antinatalist argument viewpoint, I think, being vindicated by the story. But yeah, I think and plus people might, be more apt to read like a novel than they would like a
mm,
textbook, I suppose. So I think it'd be fun. It can be engaging, but also I think it has a good core of philosophic
mm.
significance to it, or so I'd like to think at least.
Yeah. Yeah, and you were saying that it's a dialogue, and I'm assuming that the dialogue coming from the antinatalist point of view, I'm assuming that that's you channeling your views, right? But who did
Oh
you
yeah.
have in mind for the other side of the dialogue? Was this did you imagine, you know, your average person on the street who would be presumably critical, or did you try to encapsulate all of the arguments you've heard about antinatalism and work them into the dialogue? How did you see the other side of the dialogue who you were sort of speaking with? What sort of form would they be taking in your head?
Well, due to the context of the story, it's a lot of it has to do with kind of like a theological aspect. Be fruitful and multiply, you know.
Mm,
Um, but it's meant to kind of. There was one chapter there in the middle that's really is kind of like the centerpiece of the book. It really kind of folds it all in. It's meant to counter the natalist viewpoints, both from a biological, a social, and
mhm.
and also a theological viewpoint
Yeah.
that it's not defense. I mean, I really don't think life is ethically defensible. Procreation, I mean, because simply for the fact, and people like to counter David Benatar's arguments by just saying, well, it's not really that bad. You know, the majority of people don't suffer that much in life. But the only thing that you really have to bring up, as far as I'm concerned, to just refute the whole thing is that it's not voluntary. It's not. It's compulsory. No one has a choice in being born, and because of that, there's only one way out after the fact, and
Mm,
that's a rather frightening prospect. So the
mm,
arguments of the book are meant to just counter every argument, every counter argument that I could think of to try to um, ram home the point, although perhaps in not too terribly a didactic format,
mm,
that life is not defensible from an ethical standpoint. I don't think at this point.
mm. And you've already kind of mentioned it, but well, first of all, what did you hope? Did you have any specific hopes about what the impact of the book would be, or did you simply just want to put it out there and see what happens? And what has the reaction to the book been like in general?
Well, I guess the intended, I guess my intended reaction would be that maybe if somebody, there's like a young couple out there who's on the
Mm,
fence about maybe having kids or something, and they happen to read it, they would be like, he has some good points. Maybe we shouldn't do this. Um, but that's what I can hope is that maybe it
mm,
has the potential to make people really think through some things and think about what uh, they would want or not want if they hypothetically had been given the choice to be born or not, and whether they should really go through with replicating that act. But as far as the reception that I have gotten, well, I don't know if it's converted any people or changed any
mm,
minds, but from just a strictly literary um, criticism kind of way, the response has been surprisingly, on the whole, more or less pretty positive, which is a
mm.
far cry from what I was really anticipating it being. Not only
Yeah,
because
yeah.
not only because like the gist of it is so kind of can be controversial, but also because the content it gets pretty rough at certain
Mm,
points. Won't go too deep into it, but it gets pretty gnarly. But overall, the people that have read it, the majority of them have responded, that have
mm,
informed me that they've read it, have responded uh, fairly well to it, and they thought it was at least like well written and well put together. So
mm.
that's success, I guess.
No, no, 100%. And also, I assume um, that you're, I don't know what form it would take, but I assume you're part of some sort of literary community, whether it's online or if you attend in-person sort of book clubs and the like and stuff like that. Have you ever discussed antinatalism or your book in those sort of circles at something like a book club or just to be honest, I don't know what a literary community would look like, but have those discussions ever happened and what sort of reaction have you had to the ideas themselves?
Well, I've talked about it. I've actually discussed the book on another content creators channel here on YouTube. So
Mm,
I have talked about the sentiments behind it and my personal kind of resentment towards my own existence here online. No, I have not talked about it in my personal, physical, day to day life because Well, where I'm at, those kind of notions would get you. You're going to draw some stares if you air that
Yeah.
kind of sentiment. So it's better just to put it out there online where I can, because obviously Carroll Wainwright's not my real name, but so there's
Yeah.
a screen of anonymity there that I can kind of hide behind a little bit, but still get the
Mm.
ideas out there without having to um, get in any hot water in my personal life by doing that. So
Mm.
no, mainly I just air the sentiments here online, um, and through the book, of course.
Mm. Yeah, it's I mean it's a depressing state of affairs that someone who holds these views would feel like they have to sort of hide that in their personal life, but honestly it's not uncommon. So many people do, and I guess the fact that that is depressing is just another reason not to bring someone else here. The fact that if they sincerely hold a belief that is counter to what the vast majority of people hold, but it's a sincere belief and they can back it up with reasoning, it just like it's just so depressing that like something
Yeah.
like that will get in some places you can get killed for holding these views, as well as being an atheist or even going beyond beliefs. If someone's homosexual or there's some other thing about their being that people just hate, and it's just depressing that we live in a world where people will get tortured and killed for this sort of stuff. Now I'm
Yeah.
hoping that your situation is not that extreme, but
Oh
you
no.
get what I mean. It's sort of
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
yeah, even the thin end of the wedge is depressing.
Yeah. It is.
Mm. So that's your book that you've written. Do you plan to do any, and it may not be in the form of a book, but it may be in the form of something on your YouTube channel, or it may be some other written form that's not a book. Do you have any other plans for future books or works on antinatalism at all?
Well, maybe not on that specifically because
Mm.
I think that I've said like what
You
I
got it,
had to
everything out.
say. I got it all out. Like I
Yeah.
think this is, even though it's not a long book, it's it's not even 300 pages. It's not very long, and the print's
Mm.
pretty big. But I think it is remarkably comprehensive in its approach. I think I cast a pretty wide net. So what I had to say, I think I've said. So as far as
Mm.
going forward with it, I'm just advertise, advertise, advertise. Try
Mm.
to get it out there, and maybe, like I said, pull some more people in the boat that way, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, 100%. And zooming out to like wider antinatalist literature again, um, what do you think is in your view from the books you've read, what do you think is the most underrated, and you can't say your own book. What do you think what do you think is the most underrated antinatalist book that you don't think gets the credit that it deserves? And I guess there's sort of two ways that you could answer this. So please pick one of them or do both or however you want to answer this. So one way to ask that could be, what's the most underrated antinatalist book in terms of how it's written, the quality of the writing, and what's the most underrated in terms of the impact of the book and the message it sends and the strength of the arguments?
um, well, I don't know how. I think Thomas Ligotti's book is probably the best written. So maybe in terms of like the way it's written,
Mm.
like you said, the underrated in literary style, I would probably say that one because he's obviously like a professional writer. It's very well
Mm.
written. Um, but I really do think that maybe Schopenhauer stuff is kind of underrated now because not a lot of people probably that aren't like philosophy majors in college will
Mm.
probably not just go out of their way to read Schopenhauer stuff. But his ideas um, really are the genesis, I think, of what we have now
Mm.
with the, because he was the first one that was like, you shouldn't reproduce. Um, and some people have said that that's just projection of him because he had poor success with women. But regardless of that, it still stands that his ideas about what the world actually is and how, and I mentioned that in my book as well, that like if you remove the human element, it's kind of like the observer. the object subject thing. If you remove the subject, there really is no object. And I think that's what Schopenhauer said in his World as Will and Representation, of what I've read of it.
Mm,
That if you don't have anything there to behold the world, then it doesn't really, honestly, it's questionable whether it can even be said to exist. And so I think that
mm,
that's a very valuable um, concept to keep in mind, that by it sounds horrible to say to end the human race, but that's the end goal. It's just for people
mm,
to, wise up and say, we're bringing people into the world over and over, and things can be so bad. But even if they're not bad, you don't ask their consent. And so,
mm,
uh, in terminating procreation, we would kind of be terminating everything, because there wouldn't really be anyone left to say. And I think that's a very valuable notion, because it shows the importance of humans, I guess, in the world. So I guess I would say old Schopenhauer is perhaps underrated
mm.
now. Yes, because most people won't go out of their way to read that.
Yeah, no, to be honest, and I'm a guilty party here as well. Um, but I have been surprised at and I'm not alone in this. There are other people that have also been surprised by this. Um, there are a lot of people who identify as antinatalists and post about it online, who haven't actually gotten to grips with a lot of the foundational sort of texts or works about antinatalism. And look, I've read some of them, but I haven't read all of them, so I'm also a partially guilty party here, so I'm not pointing
Same here.
fingers at anyone or anything. Yeah, but I think encouraging more reading, or even like audiobooks as well. With I don't actually, is are any of Schopenhauer's stuff on audiobooks?
Oh,
I
I don't
imagine
know.
they must be,
Probably, yeah.
because yeah, because I mean, he's I mean, in terms of like the big sort of philosophers that people know the names of, he's one of them.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, there must be audiobooks out there of his ones.
Gotta
um
be.
yeah, but it's I think the more we can encourage people to make contact with the sort of the roots of where antinatalism came from, and be a bit more literate in antinatalist philosophy and the books that have been written about it, I think it can only be for the better. Um, because when not everyone is in the mood for advocating, and when I say advocating, I don't mean going out onto the street and doing something like that, but if someone asks you, if somehow you get onto the topic and someone asks you, oh, why do you believe that, it I mean, it is good for each of us as individuals to be able to have a way of communicating that, and being to a certain standard of not what's the way of putting it? I mean, I don't have the certain standard right now because I'm screwing over my words, but being able to like articulate our reasons for being antinatalist in at least a relatively succinct way, I feel like that can only be for the better. And I think reading the texts that you talked about and reading other sort of foundational texts on antinatalism, um, I think that would be like a very positive development in the community. Um, how just out of interest, like how much contact do you personally make with like the antinatalist community? Is antinatalism something that you is something you believe in and you've spoken about on your channel before? But is it something that sort of in your day-to-day life, it actually doesn't play that much of a role? Or do you get involved in the community? Are there like antinatalist literary communities out there? I've no idea.
Well, it is something I engage with daily. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that I don't wish I hadn't been born. But but I don't. If you mean like engage with like a direct community, not so
Mm,
much. I do read a lot of the Reddit pages about it to try to see new arguments, and see what the counter arguments might be, because people
mm,
are always trying to come up with new ways to stymie us. So I do try to read some of the forums, but other than just putting out the book, I don't guess I engage with any community
Mm,
directly so much. No.
mm. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Reddit. I don't know if you have other social media. There are a few groups on Facebook that do fairly regularly share new pieces of writing that have been done
Oh, I'll have to
about
look into that.
antinatalism. Yeah, a lot of some of them are books. A lot of them tend to be articles people have written, like academic
Mhm.
articles mostly. So there's a Facebook group, well, I'm going to get the words in the wrong way, but it's something like academic antinatalist philosophy or something like that.
Oh,
And that's quite a decent group to get bits of reading from. Um, you know what I actually just thought that I thought would be interesting to mention to you. So I don't know if you've seen, but there are actually a few antinatalist books coming out this year. Well, no,
oh,
hang on. Okay, not antinatalist books, but books that um consider antinatalism. So a lot of these books are not written by antinatalists. Some of them are, but there are other books that, like, um, consider the pros and cons of human extinction, for example,
mhm.
and all this sort of stuff. So I was actually just going to like read a few out and see if you've heard about them. And yeah, just get your reaction, and also just for people watching to know what sort of books are coming up, because we've been talking about like
Yeah, yeah.
literature. So one that I actually didn't list here, but is coming out, is you've heard of Peter Wessel Zapf?
Yes, and they're finally translating some of his
Yeah,
longer works into
yeah,
English, right? Yeah.
yeah. So obviously, I'm sure and many of the people watching know The Last Messiah.
Mhm.
That was actually the first bit of antinatalist literature that I did read.
Mhm.
And yeah, that obviously so for anyone who doesn't know, he was Norwegian. So his writing is in Norwegian. So the vast majority of his work, as far as I'm aware, is still in Norwegian, and not much of it has been um, translated. So The Last Messiah was translated. That's more like, would you call that like an extended poem or an essay, or I don't know how you'd refer to The Last Messiah.
Yeah, I think that's. Uh, I think I'd call that an essay. And fun fact about
Mm.
that, I actually make heavy use of that in like literally direct
Mm.
quotations in bulk
Mm.
out of that in this. In fact, that's kind of how the story of the book ends, with a passage directly out of that. So
Yeah.
to anyone out there who likes the Last Messiah, it's all in here as well. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm be curious to read what they're going to be translating out of his work coming up.
So they are translating. Let me get it up here. So the English translation of Peter Wessel Zapp's magnum opus. Okay, this is in Norwegian, so I'm going to screw this up. But please, any Norwegians watching this, forgive me. Om det tragisk, which in English is on the tragic.
Mhm.
Um, Now, what you'll be actually interested to know is on the tragic is like his magnum opus. It's being fully translated into English. Um, what I've been told, there is it's not all about antinatalism, but there is discussion of antinatalism in it. But what you'll be particularly interested in is guess who's doing. There are two people doing forwards to it. Who do you think they are?
I'm going to guess Thomas Ligotti's one of them because
Yep, he's done one.
he mentions the Last Messiah a lot in his book. So I guess
Yep.
him, and then is David Benatar the other?
Yes, yeah.
Ah,
David Benatar and Thomas Ligotti, which is really cool, So,
mhm.
you can actually pre-order the book already. You have to do it via email. I don't think there's any I don't think it's on like Amazon or anything where you can like do the
Oh,
pre-order thing. Um, but yeah, that's really interesting that some Peter Wessel Zapf is coming out. There's also a book that has actually already come out, which is I have lost the name, but it's by. Are you aware of Julio Cabrera?
yes, the Argentinian or South American.
Yeah,
I think it
I
was
don't know
Argentina.
exactly where in South America he's from, but yes, that guy. And do you know Karima Kerma?
I've heard the name. I'm not familiar with the word.
So Karim is a German antinatalist philosopher, and him and Julio hold different positions on abortion. So a book has been published where it's essentially a dialogue between them, where they're both
Oh,
antinatalists, albeit I think they're antinatalists for different reasons, although I'm sure they have
mm,
overlap. But Karim presents the pro-choice position, and Julio Cabrera presents the pro-life position, but both obviously sort of with the context of antinatalism surrounding it. And that book is already out, and it's free. It's freely available online.
oh,
Yeah, so I can send you the link later, and to anyone watching, I'll link all this in the description. Obviously, along with Carroll's book. Um, but yeah, I can send you the link to that later. It's yeah, you can download the PDF. Um,
sweet,
from Karim's blog online.
awesome.
And then there are a couple other books that have are due to come out. So none of these have come out yet. So the first one is by Matti Hairi and Amanda Sukanik. You may have heard of both of those. Matti's a philosopher from Finland, and Amanda is, well, everyone knows Amanda. She runs the Exploring Antinatalism podcast. She's been around for years in the antinatalist community. They both have a book coming out called Antinatalism, Extinction, and the End of Procreative Self-Deception,
Mm,
which sounds like it would be interesting. And then there are two other books, both written, I think, by non-antinatalists. Um, one of them is about extinction, and the other one is specifically about the individual act of procreation. So one is called Begetting: What Does It Mean to Create a Child, which is written by this woman who is just trying to consider everything surrounding creating someone, and trying to consider both the arguments for and against, and just trying to come to a conclusion of like, me as an individual, I'm considering creating someone, you know, and this is a very serious decision I'm going to make. What are all these things that I need to take into account when I'm doing this? So that sounds like it's going to be really interesting. And another one is more on a larger scale. It's not about the individual act of procreation, but it's, should we go extinct? And that book is about human extinction, arguments for, arguments against, what would the implications be, all of this sort of stuff. So I think this year is going to be pretty jam-packed for antinatalist reading.
it's our time now. It's the time in the
Yeah.
spotlight now. Yes, I'll have to
Yeah,
look into
yeah,
those
yeah.
because I could definitely review any or all of those. It sounds like yes.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I even if, I intend, okay, emphasis on the word intend, to read all of those. Um, but I mean, just for me, from a personal point of view, but I'm sure this goes for loads of other people, it would be invaluable to have someone do a book review on books like that, to be able to watch a book review. So you do what you will, but you will have my blessings for those book reviews. Um, cool. The final sort of thing I wanted to touch on is, antinatalism or not antinatalism. What are the things that you're sort of excited for going forward, or you're working on? Is there anything you're working on? Have you got future plans for the YouTube channel, or future plans on some other book that's unrelated to antinatalism, or what are you looking at for the future?
Well, I mean, I recently hit 1K subscribers on the channel, so I'm happy about that.
Nice.
Riding that high, and then yeah, I'll just going forward, just try to um, advertise my own book more, get it out there in many forums, maybe as I can.
Mm,
I really need to I really should try to get it out there on Reddit so more people could be aware of it on some of those forums. But yeah, that's just keep trying to keep going up, up, up. I guess is all I can
mm.
say for me.
No, 100%. And um, yeah, I don't spend too much time on Reddit, but I will put the link for your book, and all your links to your channel, and you said
Oh,
you did
thanks.
another interview on another channel, so I'll link that in the description as well if people want to go over and watch that one. Um, but yeah, so people can find all of that in the description. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for um, one, coming on and having this conversation with me, but also doing the videos that you do, because I think obviously you do book reviews for non-antinatalist books as well, but in terms of the antinatalist community specifically, I think getting people more engaged in antinatalist writing is invaluable. And I think your book reviews only go to further that. So I think you're doing really good work on that front. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always great to because to hash it out in person where you kind of bottle it up and you need to.
Mm,
It's good to talk about it in a constructive
yeah.
manner. So thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun.